All right, there we go. Jesse McMeekin. What is going on, my friend?
Not much, man. How you doing?
I am doing well. We were just bonding a little bit over coffee because when you, Kyle, and Kieran came out to Salt Lake, man, that was almost
We got like
two and a half,
2.5. Well,
almost 3 years ago now, maybe
yeah,
two and a
whatever
half
it
ish,
was.
something like
But
that. Whatever it is, right? We walked up into the avenues and you all got to discover Jack Mormon coffee
oh my God,
because it's a really interesting proposition that Mormons don't drink coffee. Yet one of the best coffee spots in America, I am not afraid to make that claim,
no, I'm gonna
is
stand
here
by
is
you.
is here in Salt Lake City. Because I remember telling you guys, like, guys, there's this place here that has amazing coffee. You're like, we're from fucking New York. Uh, we have good coffee. But your
When on
coffee's
top of
not
that,
going to
you
be that
drove us
good.
20 miles across the city. It's like, yeah, we're gonna go
Worth
grab some coffee. I'm like, all right, we're going to the corner. It's like, get on the highway, head all the way across. I'm like, I got nothing to do, so I'm here for it. But damn, okay,
Worth it.
absolutely.
Worth it. Yeah, like I would do unthinkable things to get them to give me their cold brew and or iced coffee recipe. I've
I'm
tried.
thinking sponsorship. I just, I'm like, do you guys
Dude.
sponsor athletes? Do you want to start? Because you're
Yeah.
pre-workout as far as I'm concerned. Like,
It's the best pre-workout on the planet.
yeah,
It's the best. I should try that. Maybe I'll walk up to you and be like, "Hey, do you guys feel like sponsoring a local small business?" I have
slash, yeah,
a viewership and listenership of people that love to consume some caffeine.
yeah. You know what? We're gonna do an ad break now. Just do a quick ad read for
Yes.
Jack Mormon Coffee. For those of you
Oh
listening at
man,
home, they do have a website and they do deliver.
they do.
Check it out.
Uh-huh. Or just get on the home roasting train. But that's a whole nother. I'm so far
Oh
down
my
the
God, you're
rabbit hole
so
now.
committed. I'm
I
I'm
am.
so impressed by that. For everything else you've done, that's what's got me the most
that's the
impressed. I'm
that's
like,
the peak. The
whatever.
peak
Yeah.
achievement.
Roast
Beautiful man.
his
Well,
own
let's
beans.
let's dive in here and well, first I'll kind of have you give your background, who you are,
Sure.
blah 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 blah. But then what we're gonna do is we'll dive in. We had a little bit of a back and forth off air and texted a tad kind of what we wanted to talk about today. It's summer. Everybody has it on their mind, right? Like everyone wants to look good naked. Everyone's going to pools. Everyone going to the beach. Everyone's like, hey, maybe I'm holding on to a little bit of the extra COVID weight. I would like to be more jacked. I would like to lose some weight, shred out, whatever it's going to be. So we'll dive in and talk more about just like tactics, strategies, things that people should be doing to actually like put on muscle and to like get that physique they're interested in. Along the way, I think hopefully we can knock down some sacred cows like barbells, and then I think dopamine can be a really cool back end part of that conversation. I think it ties in really well. But first, let's have you give the elevator pitch: who you
All
are,
right.
what you
Yeah.
do, blah blah blah. Because you've been in the game for a long time.
Yeah. So as fast as I can do it without skimping over stuff too much.
Take your time, because the longer you talk, the less questions I have
The
to
less
ask, and
you
it's
got to do.
fantastic.
No, this is always the painful part for me. So I got into this originally as an athlete, and I was kind of your prototypical 160-pound skinny high school athlete, and so was a pretty good lacrosse player. But bottom line, needed to be stronger and probably just heavier, carry a little bit more weight on the field, and kind of help prevent some injuries that I was starting to see crop up. And so walked into a gym. Owner of the gym showed me around, put me on a bodybuilding body part split. And more years than I'd like to admit later, I'm still sort of, playing around with some of the same stuff. At some point, I realized I was more than kind of passively interested in this. And so started working as a trainer when I was in college. Got away from that a little bit, but ultimately, as I was doing some other stuff, I worked in management. I realized that if I looked at my bookshelf, it was all this kind of stuff. Like this was still something I was looking into for fun. And so maybe 7 years ago or so, got back into it. I run my own business, Adapt Performance, which focuses mostly on online training, and then also work for Equinox doing both training and then in-house education for them. So work on kind of the onboarding process and development for their trainers in-house.
Beautiful. I love it. So if we were going to try to throw a number on it, how
Yeah.
long have you been involved in the iron game
You're going
one
to
way
make
or
me throw that
another?
out. People are going to work backwards and figure out how old I actually am. Yeah, 27 years.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So we have a decent size exposure there. We have some experience.
Yeah. For better or for worse, we've got at least some numbers there, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's start with this. If we're going to have this conversation about physique, and let's put a quick qualifier on this. We're not talking bodybuilding, and we are not talking stepping on stage to compete in bodybuilding. That is a totally different conversation. Like,
Right.
we're just talking about, hey, I'm a 30-year-old, whatever. I still like to train to be athletic. I'm strong. I'm powerful. I have good conditioning, right? And who doesn't want to be jacked and carry around some muscle mass?
Yeah. Look like you're an athlete, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I want to look like, I don't want to look like, no offense to cross-country distance runners if you're listening, I don't want to look like you. Like, I want to look like a NFL, like, strong safety, if that resonates
Perfect.
with people,
Yeah.
whatever that means, right? So if we're going to think about that as a context, and I don't know if you want to start more like kind of lay out of training days, concept theories, we're thinking kind of weeks, but if someone comes to you and they're like, Jesse, it's June, I'm still holding on to a little bit of this COVID weight, I would really love to put on some more muscle, lose some of this fat, and look kind of more like a superhero when I go to the beach or I go to the pool. Where would you like to start that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation probably starts around schedule for me. Is just trying to figure out sort of realistic and not make someone feel like it's a trick question, but like, what can you give me? I had a conversation actually with Kieran a few years ago and sort of said, like, your job is to be able to take as much stress as you can. And my job is to give you as much as you can handle and to give you the right kind of stress. But it's an honest conversation to figure out how much can you take. And that's not a tough guy thing. That's not a macho thing. That's just looking at kind of the entirety of your life and saying, what's your sleep? What's your work? What's your family commitment? What kind of facilities have you got? And ultimately, if someone's coming to me with those kinds of goals, I probably bare minimum am looking for 3 days a week with me or with weights in their hands. And at least 1 or 2 other days a week where I can get them to do something that feels like activity. If we want to make good progress, I think, I try to be honest up front. If you're not able to do that, we can make some progress, but it's going to slow. So,
yeah, I mean, like, the population listening here will fit very nicely into that, because this isn't gonna, we don't really have people listening that are like, I'm maybe going to make it 2 to 3 days a week. It's like, right. I'm going to train 5 to 6 days a week. It's just a question of what am I going to be doing when I show up to train?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so with that as a context, I think they fit in really nicely here. So let's say, like, perfect world scenario, right? You can do exactly what you want with this person. Are you looking 3 days a week of lifting? Would you rather go 4 days of lifting? Are you thinking upper lower split? We go on whole body days? I was be intrigued to know, like, how you're thinking in terms of structure and layout.
I think you kind of hit on all the things that I default to. And some of that, as much as we like to think this is just hard science, is it's sort of playing around and seeing what works. I've seen the best success myself, and I've got a bodybuilding background. I stepped on stage, I competed, I did the body part split stuff. I was moderately successful with it. I've seen more success actually with either an upper lower split or a full body approach than anything else. I think the first thing to kind of take out of people's minds is this idea that somehow that's a beginner thing, and say, no, that's absolutely not. There's no such thing. It may work for beginners, but it's probably going to work for you too. You just need to let go of kind of the ego and take a fresh look at it. I think some of that is just sort of how hungry are you to get in the gym, right? And this is sort of, I guess, previewing kind of the dopamine conversation. I've found recently that if I'm hitting weights 3 days a week, I'm pretty excited for the days that I get to lift. And I think that goes a long way. I was at a point, and I spend my entire week in a gym where if I had to actually lift 4 days a week, I'd get it done. I'm a good little boy, and I'll do what's written on the program, but I'm not quite as excited for it. And I think something gets lost in that, where I'm not hitting it quite as hard. I'm not going after it the same way, and so probably getting more out of that 3 days a week. But I think it's saying what works for you at a given time. And then also to some extent priorities. I think for me right now, I'm kind of chasing the conditioning side of this a little bit more. That gives me more time to spend on that conditioning. Whereas if I'm hitting weights 4 days a week pretty hard, I've got to pull the conditioning back a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. And I think two things there that are really important to kind of highlight for people listening. One, like you can achieve this physique goal, right? This physique conversation, training, lifting, we'll say lifting 3 or 4 days a week, right? Like you don't have to lift 4 days a week to get a really good physique. You just don't. 3 really good days of lifting can make it happen, right? As long as it's built into another plan with everything else we're doing. Because at the end of the day, you have to be having fun, right? Like on our training team, every 2 weeks we send a check-in email to our people. And I think like the second question on that check-in is, are you having fun training?
Right.
Because that's hugely important to me. Like if you're not having fun training, then you could have the best program that's ever been written and you're not going to get any results or outcomes from it. So like if you're sitting there like sweating bullets and you're like walking laps around your house, like, man, I don't know, should I 3 days a week or 4 days a week, 3 days a week or 4 days a week? It's like, fuck, just pick one. Like, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. You'll be fine. Right.
Yeah. Like what I like to do for my people is like, we have 3 lift days. And then the 4th day is like a hybrid, right? Like you'll get something that's Metcon or medley, like kind of more of a medley, because people end up really enjoying the novelty of that. It's something new. I know that I'm still going to be getting some type of a body comp hypertrophy response to that stimulus because I get load, I get hypoxia. Dr. Mike T and I have talked about this, where the Metcon is in this weird realm all in itself, where you're kind of getting hypertrophy and endurance somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, right? But you can lift 3 days, you can lift 4 days and still be really successful. And then the other point here, and maybe you want to dive into this more, if we're thinking whole body day versus upper lower split, is that again going to be more preference for you and the person to be like, hey, which one of these are you going to enjoy more? Which one are you going to work harder on?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. For me, it's probably, I guess if I try and put a number on it, maybe 3 different things. One, it's kind of what are you going to enjoy more? 2, in some cases, kind of, some wear and tear stuff comes in on that. Like, are you getting beaten up with the extra day? If that's the case, let's pull it back. That's happened to me at stretches. And then I think the third is, ironically, the 4 days a week sounds like more frequency, but if I'm an upper lower split, it's actually less frequency, by 50% less frequency, right? If I'm going to hit a full body Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I get a squat stimulus 3 days a week. And for the record, that sucks, but that also works, right? It's like, and now I'm going to go deadlift too. Let's just pick a hinge and hit it hard. And I think it can be tough, again, for anyone with that background where you're sort of like, it's funny. I work in kind of a Globo gym environment, and you watch dudes come in and just hammer away at a muscle group, right? And you and I have talked. I love me some volume. Like I like hitting high volume stuff, and
upper
I
body
respond
above the waist. I like above the waist volume.
That's fair. Yeah, nobody likes a set of 20 squats, but that said, like, how many different versions of a bicep curl do you need, right? You're bending your elbow. You can bend it upside down. You can bend it with a cable. You can hold the kettlebell. Like at some point, like the same is true of your press. The same is true of your row. The same is true of your squat. And it's sort of getting, I guess, being smart enough to get a little dumb and say there really is not that much distinction between these. I don't need to hit this from 9 different angles, despite what I read in Flex magazine when I was 15,
Yep. Yeah, I very much agree. And so I think the upper lower split for me, sometimes it's nice being able to go in and just not have to worry about hitting legs.
Yeah.
Psychologically, it is wonderful because I don't ever need to get excited or amped up to do anything upper body. It is,
right.
I'm pumped right from the get-go. If I've got heavy squats or heavy deadlifts, there is just a psychological wear and tear that takes And I'll wake up in the morning and be like, oh boy, that's what's happening.
It's that day, isn't it? Yeah.
Like tomorrow, I already know it's coming tomorrow, and I've been sitting around thinking about it all afternoon. So sometimes it's nice just to go in, and I'm just going to get a massive upper body pump, whatever it is. Maybe it's delts, arms, back, lats, etc. I don't need to psychologically go anywhere to enjoy, to really get after that.
Yeah.
You have to go someplace if I'm putting a lot of weight on a bar to squat or deadlift.
Right.
And this could potentially transition to a really good conversation, because I think people listening to this may hear us say squat, deadlift, bench, and they're immediately thinking straight bar back squat, straight bar deadlift, straight bar bench press. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw up the huge no X for anybody that watches the video, because that's not the case. We're talking about these three movements as larger patterns.
Yeah.
And so this is potentially another sacred cow that we can knock off the pedestal, because if the primary outcome goal is this physique, is getting jacked, looking like a superhero, you do not, and I would probably recommend that you do not, touch a straight bar. Those my 2 cents there. I would love for you to weigh in on that, and then we can unpack more what we think when we say those movements. What are we actually thinking of in terms of exercise selection?
Yeah, no, I think we're largely in agreement there. I think, look, I mean, I think we're on the same page. I love the bench. I'm actually the rail guy. I like the deadlift. It's my one respectable lift. I can put some real weight on a bar, and and that's not bad. When I think about hypertrophy driven movements, though, I think the one that I would keep with a barbell, where I'd say, you know what, I'm taking this one to my desert island of getting jacked. I'm going to take an RDL.
Yes, I would 100% agree with that.
But other than that, I don't think I would. I don't think I'd take a barbell row. I wouldn't take a bench. I'm sure as hell not pressing overhead.
I'm definitely not taking a back squat.
No, my back squat's just another deadlift, right? And I think Zach Couples broke that down a couple of years ago. And you look at whether you're getting fancy and looking at, what's happening at your pelvis, or you just look at butt goes back instead of butt goes down. Yeah, you're stronger because you're getting so much posterior chain. And I think that it's important. I'm not knocking those movements. I'm looking at them. Yeah, through the lens of that outcome. I think what makes them bad hypertrophy movements makes them great strength movements and makes them great athletic movements, right? If I'm trying to squat heavy or front squat heavy, there's 95 different things that might give and make that exercise fail. That means it's terrible for my legs, but it's fantastic if I'm, back to you being a strong safety. If I'm playing strong safety and I've got to keep, a tight end off of me who's trying to block, I'm trying to move you to the side and I need head to toe strength all working together. So they're great movements. They have their place. I will kind of rotate through some of them, but if I'm focused on hypertrophy, I'm not seeing an awful lot of it. I had the embarrassing, experience of saying, you know what, I found a version of a Smith machine squat that I really like. I'm set up at an angle. I've got some stuff going on so that I can hit crazy depth. The weight is garbage, but it's the closest I can set up in a commercial gym to a hack squat because they don't have one. And it's a great exercise for quad growth. So.
For sure. And the one thing I'll say there in the RDL realm is I think you can also be tremendously successful with a trap bar RDL if you have it as an option. But yeah, I think as far as a straight bar goes, we're thinking this more physique body comp hypertrophy realm. The only thing I would use it for would be, an RDL, snatch grip RDL, something in that realm, so I can actually chase some hamstring hypertrophy. But then when we think about a squat, there are so many better options. If my goal is to drive hypertrophy in your legs, in particular your quads, like you just mentioned, why would I choose something like a front squat, which is a great exercise for a different outcome, right? But like you mentioned, I have a lot of things that are going to fail before my quads fail on a front squat or an SSB squat for that matter. Granted, I think the SSB squat heels elevated would be a better option than a front squat.
Closer, right? Yeah.
It gets me closer there. But in a perfect world, if you have access to a hack squat, like you just mentioned, or to one of those pendulum,
love that.
squat swing things, both are, I think, just like 10 times better options for this physique realm. You're going to get a huge quad pump. Your legs, your quads are actually going to be the thing that fails. I'm going to take away all this extra risk and complexity by putting you on a machine, which is an okay thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's where you got to think of them as patterns, think of them as outcomes, and we're trying to match the right choice for the right outcome.
Well, and I think that complexity idea is also an interesting one. It's this idea that complexity is inherently a good thing. But, the more stress I want to apply to you, the less complexity I want you to deal with. I think it was Pat Davidson in kind of his prelude to mass was just talking about picking exercises you could teach a gorilla, and that kind of stuck with me. It's like, did I teach a gorilla to trap bar deadlift? I probably could. And running that program, were there days that I felt like a gorilla with a trap bar? Like, yeah, kind of. I was pretty dumb by the time you get to that last round of the 30-30. But I think that's important, right? I need the stress where I want it. And if the stress is mental, that's driving a different kind of fatigue than what I'm after.
For sure. Yeah. My goal is, again, I just don't think people ask that question enough. Like, what is the outcome that I want from this exercise on this day?
Yep.
Right? Because depending on what that outcome is, I may try to choose something really dumb, or I'll choose something a little bit more complex. Right? Like, if I just want a physique outcome and I have a hack squat, you're going to hack squat.
Yeah.
It's idiot proof. It is so hard for you to mess up a hack squat. You can load the piss out of it and your legs are going to be the first thing that fails. Perfect. If I'm trying to choose something that, like, as another random example, maybe I want more of a movement outcome. Like, I'm trying to improve movement, the ability to control a rib cage and a pelvis, to get into left stance, get into right stance, etc. Right. Maybe I'm doing a wall supported split squat.
Sure.
Right? More complex, more things happening. You're just free floating in space. You're probably not going to get a great hypertrophy response out of that movement. You're going to feel your quads like crazy, but there's not enough external load and tension to probably really get any type of muscular change unless you're a total beginner. But what I do know is that by giving you that exercise, I can teach you to move a little bit better. You're going to feel a little bit better. And so that's I think that dichotomy is incredibly important for people to get clear on.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also an interesting place where those exercises for me still have a place in a hypertrophy driven program. I kind of look at them over the years as kind of preventive maintenance.
Yep.
And this is the benefit of 23, whatever I decided, 27 years of doing this, is I've run into a lot of trouble. I've tried to run just sagittal, bilateral, nothing but that for months on end. And it goes really well until it doesn't. And it's saying, no, to the left stance, right stance. Like, if I spend a little bit of time on a split squat, and if I learn to rotate my pelvis around my femurs, my hack squat or my leg press or whatever I'm doing is less likely to get wonky on me, right? My knees, my hips are doing what they ought to. The same can be true of my shoulders, the same, whatever I'm looking at. But saying, like, yeah, those are going to have a place. They're the sideshow. They're not the main stage.
Yeah. And like places that we like to bring those in I like to put them in the back end of days as accessory work, right? Just like you said, it's maintenance. It's just car maintenance. Sometimes if we get more aggressive with the programming and I just don't have room to fit it on your lift days, then that becomes your conditioning. On an easy conditioning day, I'll just give you a movement circuit with low reps, high rounds. You're never going to get a pump. You're never going to get failure. But we're just going to work through these 8 to 10 exercises for 20 minutes. And we're just going to get repetitions. And that's where I can get my movement input there. Right. And so I think those are two really good options for people listening. If you're like, well, I need this work, but I'm not sure where to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I look at it the same way. And I think you also mentioned with the Metcon, kind of that variability, maybe that little bit of novelty in there. That's the other problem inherently is if you and I are both saying, like, dude, just hit a hack squat, like, 6 months from now, I'm probably still going to tell you to do just hit a hack squat. So if we can put something else in there that has some room for some complexity or stability progressions, that may help keep you engaged and feel like you're not, living Groundhog's Day, especially these days where we've all been living Groundhog's Day. But yeah.
For sure, 100%. I think the hack squat example there is good because when I'm thinking about laying out a training day, I have an output block, and that output block is where I want to put my big moves for the day.
Yeah.
And so and I don't tend to change that a lot, right? If I'm writing a program, say 12 to 16 weeks, that output block doesn't change minus set and rep scheme. Where I start changing exercises is going to be more the accessory realm because we'll get more novelty. We'll get more novelty there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but, and I think there it's, increasing novelty is sort of sacrificing stimulus, at least from a hypertrophy standpoint. But here it's good. I think the other benefit of that novelty is the variability, where it's saying, as much as I'm hitting this pattern, I'm hitting it a little bit differently. So, preventive maintenance, again, maybe it's rotating the tires. It's like, all right, we're not hitting the exact same thing for your joints every single day, every single week. But
and so if we think set and rep scheme in this realm, there are a lot of options, but I think the easiest way to do this that you can't mess up, that always works, is double progression method.
Yep.
Right out of the gate.
Same thing.
For me, when I do double progression method, I have like 3 ranges. You can be 12 to 15 reps, 10 to 12 reps, or 8 to 10 reps if we're thinking hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go wrong. For people listening who are like, what is this hoopla, witchcraft, and wizardry you're speaking of? So double progression method is fantastic because it takes away any and all guesswork of what load should I be using for this exercise. So say that we have a rep range of 10 to 12 reps for this given exercise. You'll come in and you'll work. If you hit 12 reps, so the top of that range, so say you're doing 3 sets of 8 to 10 reps, 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps. If you hit the top of that rep range for all 3 sets, you have to increase load the following week. So arbitrary numbers, like let's say I hack squat 100 pounds, 3 by 12. Awesome. Next week, I have to increase weight. And you're going to keep doing that. Eventually, you're going to reach a point where maybe you go 3 by 12, 3 by 11, 3 by 10. Now we're where we want to be, and now we're working. Because now the following week you come back, you repeat the weight, and you're fighting to get the top of that rep range across the board. Once you hit the top of the rep range, now we bump the weight again, right? Yeah. And so you can use that as an indicator of when it's potentially time to change exercises. Because eventually you will run into somewhat of a wall with that.
Right. Yeah, well, and I think, again, I've found that things like that provide kind of a better focus for a workout. And I think that focus is really where that dopamine kick comes from. And so going in saying, I'm getting all 12 reps, all 3 rounds, so that I can put more weight on the bar is a much different experience than like you and your buddy looking at each other and going, I don't know, another 5 pounds on the bench. Yeah, sure. And it's like, dude, that was not all you, no matter what he was saying. And B, like, where's that coming from? Is that sustainable over time? I think it's measured there. And I think it's pretty foolproof.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just always works and you can't mess it up. Right. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for here. And so if we're going to think, I think the dopamine conversation is really interesting. And I think CrossFit has given a really interesting glimpse into the power of this dopamine effect. Yeah. Because that's another place where these Metcons and these medleys come in where you get this massive dopamine rush after that you get addicted to. Another way that you could replicate that potentially is going to be doing something more like a machine circuit, right? Like you can think of like the 30-30 circuit. Just pick 10 exercises, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, move through machines. You're going to get a humongous dopamine kick. You're going to be in such a just acidic pain cave, right? But you're probably going to come back for more. I think that's what you're interested in when you start talking about the dopamine effect, is getting people to have that buy-in, to work harder, to keep showing up, to keep coming back.
Yeah, well, I think dopamine is interesting. I kind of dug into this a little bit a few years ago to try and get a better understanding of it. And, I think pop culture, we always hear it's the reward hormone, right? You go do something and it's pleasurable, so you get dopamine. And what we kind of misrepresent there is that it's actually released in an anticipatory fashion. And so it's anticipating you doing something rewarding, and it's what makes you go seek that out. And so, I don't know if you ever saw, we may have talked about it, but Joel Jameson, who obviously has some kind of a complicated relationship with CrossFit due to his area of expertise, but wrote an article, maybe 4 years ago, and just said the biggest thing that CrossFit does right. And he just hits on dopamine. And he said part of it is that they, whereas, a traditional gym environment, we kind of define your goals by, hey, we're going to lose some weight. At some point that starts to slow down and your dopamine kind of trickles off. CrossFit has kind of changed the game. And, he sort of says it's such an amorphous description of what they do. We're going to make you a better athlete in all contexts and whatever the heck it is. But ultimately says the goal just becomes to survive the workout, just finish it. And guess what? You did. And so you get that dopamine kick the next time and you get your butt up off the couch and you go do it again. I think a dopamine is kind of like, it's why you get excited to do a workout that you ought to dread. Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think like,
that's the sweet spot there.
I was going to say the secondary effect there with CrossFit in particular, when you get the community and the competition aspect right, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I would imagine that's just like pouring gasoline on the dopamine fire.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience with any of those environments, right? I'm not going to claim I've gotten so into it that I ought to be the expert. But I think that, just kind of anecdotally, like you give me something that's a little bit out of reach, a little bit of a challenge, I might get it done. And then you put me, kind of in the trenches with some other people who are in the same fight, right? Like I think we've all had that experience, whether it's sports. I've even had it in jobs, right? Like there were jobs that I loved despite them being miserable. And I turn around and look at it years later. I'm like, no, I hated the job, but I love the people I was doing it with. And we were all getting our asses kicked by the same thing at the same time together. And so we showed up and did it again. So yeah, I think that's absolutely true, right? I think it just kind of amplifies the whole thing.
I think I've definitely had that experience. You mentioned sports. I think one of the things that really drew me to training in the weight room, why I got bit by that bug, is it was the only thing I found that could get me a similar high as when I played sports. I was actually talking to someone about this the other day. We were talking about emotions and all this other stuff, because I'm a pretty analytical dude. Ask my wife. Like I'm not very emotional. I'm working on it. But I was talking to her the other day. We were having this conversation. She's like, well, when did you actually feel like you were the most emotional? I was like, oh, sports. Like sports gave me the largest range of exposure of these just like crazy highs, these really low lows. But like there's nothing that beats that rush of like hitting a home run in a big game in the bottom of the ninth, or making a big play, or this, that, or the other. And any athlete listening to this is going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Yep. And then when you're sports end, you're kind of left with this humongous gaping hole. So for me, like the only place I can still find that outlet, still get that rush, a little bit of it, that sensation, like I'm kind of chasing that high, is when I train. Because like if I start blasting music out there, I'm having a good day, like I'm hitting PRs, like you just start getting after it and you're like, this is what it felt like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. I've kind of been playing in terms of like my own programming and stuff I've given to clients with different ways to, I almost think of it as like part of what defined sports and in such a positive way was there was a scoreboard, right? You knew how you did. That home run in the bottom of the ninth doesn't matter if nobody's keeping score. It's like, hey, great, James, like, we don't know what inning it is. We're not sure if someone else is coming up to bat, but like you hit that thing really far. Nice job. And so there's got to be some stakes. Yeah, right. Like there's got to be some stakes to it. And I think looking at stuff where, kind of the flip side is that it's the downside to the workout sometimes is it's like, hey, dude, how was your workout today? And you're like, yeah, it was all right. Like, why just all right? I don't really know. Well, were your weights off? No. Right? Like you don't have a great answer for that. And so I think when I can put a section in a program that kind of answers that question for you, you walk out and you say, I won today or I lost today. And a loss isn't that defeating. It's just refocusing. One of the dumber things and simpler things I've been playing with is just total reps, right? I'll pick two non-competing movements, really simple, like a leg press and a plate-loaded machine press, right? And say, we're going to pick a weight. You've got this much time. I want you to get 55 reps with both. Go. And you go. And if you get it in the time, we add weight. And if you don't get it in the time, we stay where we are. And it's just one of these, like, you got a clock, you got a scoreboard, and you know whether you won or you lost. And it's hard as hell. But the people I've done that for show up and they work their asses off for a few minutes. And then we get some more of that kind of sensory motor stuff done later on in the workout, and we finish with some conditioning, and they, huge progress week after week. I think it has more to do with the effort and the dopamine than anything genius. And like, hey, I don't know if you guys have heard of a leg press. It's pretty cool.
But that's why it's so important. And I've harped on this a lot. It's so important you have to cook competition and challenge into any good training program. Just giving the sets and reps is step one. You have to figure out how to gamify that experience for the person doing it. Like, for people listening to this, managing your own program, if you've ever done any of the programs I've written, most of the Rebel, like anything in our training team for sure, we gamify everything for our people because it changes no pun intended, changes the game, right? Because they know exactly what they're trying to beat every single week. They have numbers. Like, I'm either trying to beat reps, or I'm trying to beat total volume and tonnage moves, or there's a challenge. I got to post it in this thing. So I want to give you exposure every single day, every single week, so you know exactly, like you said, the win-loss column. Where am I keeping score? What am I trying to do this week? Because otherwise, you can just go train 3 weeks and you're just going to go through the motions.
Yeah. And I think, you kind of started with it. It's like, great program, mediocre effort is going to get just crushed by mediocre program, great effort. And imagine if you had great program, great effort, right? But I think we've all seen like someone running a program that doesn't look very smart, or working with a trainer that we don't think is very smart, but they're making progress. And you kind of have to step back at some point and say, like, they're getting something right. Let me look at it and figure out what that is.
Yeah. And I love the time sets are such another powerful tool that you can use. And it ties in really well with this body composition, physique, hypertrophy conversation, because like that can work in a really big way. Like the time sets or doing density type protocols.
Yeah. And that's really kind of where I took that from, right? Is if you've looked at like escalating density training, there's sort of that particular model of it has some pretty defined parameters for when you progress and how many reps and this and that. But it's this idea that you take, a trap bar deadlift and, again, something that's not going to compete with it, upper body, and just go to town. You can use it for strength, you can use it for whatever, but I think density is another one of those training variables, especially when it comes to the body comp, that's not really looked at. Is so, total tonnage, but how long did it take you, right? Like the clock is a really underused element in most gyms. You kind of look at the wall, you're like, why is everyone wearing a watch and why are there all these clocks? Because apparently Instagram's how you time your rest. Like, of course you can bench more. You rested 9 minutes. Like, and maybe that's your goal and maybe that's in line, but maybe it's not. And so I think just sort of saying like, hey, here are those parameters. Again, especially if I'm looking for that body comp, it's just saying like, look, you moved 30,000 pounds in 10 minutes. Let's see if we can make it 31,000.
I love it. Fantastic. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else in this realm that'd be really pertinent to hit on, because we've talked about sort of upper lower split structures, how many days a week you train. We've talked about rep schemes, things in that realm, different protocols. Is there anything you feel like we're just totally leaving? Is there a big gaping hole here for people listening?
No, I don't think there's any big gaping hole. I mean, I think to kind of put a bow on sort of where my thinking is, like I think we've got really similar program structure and very similar structure within a day, right? I'm starting with the thing that I think will do you the most good. and where I want you to apply the most stress. If it's hypertrophy or body comp driven, it's going to be sagittal, it's going to be bilateral, it's going to be really simple. And I'm going to try and use a tool that targets the stress where I want it, as opposed to making it really general, right? I think
more muscular, stress, less neural. Yeah.
And I think general stress can be a really good way to drive fat loss, but still not really neural, right? I may want hormonal, I may want mechanical, but I don't really want that neural stress of like, can I do this on a Bosu ball? I think as I get farther into the workout, things get a little less gorilla-like, right? We may get onto one leg, we might use one arm. I'm a big fan of like rowing patterns and pulling patterns as a one-arm thing, just to kind of keep scapular movement good, because I think that feeds into everything else. And then I think maybe the last part of it we haven't touched on is just that the idea that conditioning supports that, right? It's that cardio is anabolic, even if not in the moment. Like, all recovery is aerobic. If you don't have an engine, you're not recovering on your off days the same way you are. If your resting heart rate's high 60s, you probably want to hit that a little harder and see if we can get it down under 60. But
yeah, you need the aerobic side of the world. You need the requisite work capacity to be able to handle the stress that's going to get you the outcome you want. The conversation today has been around hypertrophy, body comp, physique. In order to make that happen, you need the requisite work capacity to take on that type of stress, right? And I know, so like Ryan the Cure, who's with us here at Rebel as a hypertrophy coach, phenomenal coach. I've seen him do that so many times where early on in a program, when he first gets somebody, they do a work capacity phase right off the gate.
Right.
Because he knows that this person won't be able to actually handle the other training they're going to be getting to. You have to earn the right to do that other training. So you hit a work capacity phase, and then maybe we go into metabolic stress, mechanical tension, things that are more classical hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I think it's, earn it is not it's not meant in that like, are you cool enough? Are you tough enough? It's just saying like, it's just not going to do you any good. Like you don't know what to do with it. Like, let's throw you into 400 level physics before you took 100 level physics. Like it doesn't make any sense, quite literally, like building blocks and foundations for sure.
Yeah. One of the things that I try to harp on a lot on the podcast and with our athletes is that if you want an adaptation, you have to be able to purchase that adaptation. You have to have the money in your bank account to buy that adaptation. Right? Like you can't buy a house if you don't have the money to buy the house or a car, whatever it is. It's a similar thing when we're training. The work capacity, these other bits that we've been talking about, those are the things that are putting money in the bank account for you. So that when you have this big stressor and you make a withdrawal, you can actually pay for it and not go into the red in the bank account.
Right. Because that ultimately is where, injuries crop up and, you start seeing stuff slide back and
For sure. Jesse, man, this has been beautiful. This has been a fantastic,
good time.
Fantastic conversation. So where can people go to find you, all the cool things that you guys have going on right now?
I think the easiest place probably just find me on Instagram. Just at Jesse McMeekin is probably the one that's most updated. If you don't mind looking at the occasional picture of, my wife or my dog, they're both better looking than me. So I would recommend you deal with it. But yeah, I think stuff there. And then obviously you can check out the website, just adapt-performance.com.
Beautiful. And we'll link to all of that in the show notes for the listeners. So yeah, definitely go check out Jesse, everything that he has going on. Phenomenal coach. Awesome dude. You guys can sign up and chat more about Jack Mormon coffee and cold brew. He can give you all the important details. But
sponsorship.
I was going to keep pitching it. Maybe someone one day will be like, hey, there's this guy who keeps talking about you. He won't shut up about you. Oh, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Give me that and like a peanut butter sponsorship. I'm good to go.
Awesome.
Well, have an amazing week, everybody. Jesse, thank you again.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks, James.